4. We're at the Jones Library in Amherst, Massachusetts with Jacob Fine. I guess I'll ask you to start by just telling, you grew up in Amherst. Tell about growing up in Amherst and the Jewish community as you experienced it growing up.
Should I hold this?
I got it.
Oh, okay. We moved here right before my bar mitzvah, so I was 13. I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana, actually, until then. Moved here the summer of '89, and actually it was the first summer that they hadn't had a full-time rabbi in Amherst at that time either. So it was the same summer that Rabbi Sheila Weinberg was hired. We came the same summer, so that was the community that we became part of. I was bar mitzvah there the first summer that we moved here. You want me to speak to growing up?
Yeah, what? In this town.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'm interested in, because you were starting to tell me about your dad traveling around, you being a kid going with, I talk about that too.
Sure. So my folks, but specifically to the Jewish community?
Yeah.
So my folks, became active, I guess, pretty, quickly upon arriving in Amherst. I did, was involved with the synagogue, with whatever programs that they had for post bar mitzvah, which I don't think was particularly great. There was a kind of a chevra of young of a lot of my friends in Amherst ended up being Jewish. There's a lot of Jewish people here. I think that certainly was among them kind of most observant of my friends and family. Was more educated and more observant than most folks, but there was kind of strong cultural Judaism among a lot of my friends. Was involved. I guess probably the strongest Jewish social community that I was part of was a youth group that we had that kind of came out of the synagogue. That was pretty strong, pretty vibrant, and had some terrific role models who were advisors to that were UMass students that happened to kind of get involved. So that was a very positive experience. My social community, Amherst is a pretty diverse town, and my social community was quite diverse, but I did have a number of Jewish friends. I think, my Jewish education growing up here was largely home, and the youth movement that I grew up in, which was Young Judea, so the summers, that every summer since I was, 10, 11, I'd be, with Young Judea camps.
And are those kids drawn from, throughout Western Mass? Or?
That's throughout the country. Until you were, 16 or 17, it was local. So growing up, I went to the Midwest camps, having grown up in Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. There were people from all over the Midwest. And then once I was 16, 17, you go to a camp in New York, where people from all around the country. And it was, kind of a non-denominational Zionist youth movement with a pretty diverse group of families sending their kids there. So, there was no day school. Now there's a day school in Northampton, which I bet and I hope that my parents would have sent me there, but there wasn't. So my Jewish education was pretty limited. Both my folks grew up in much stronger Jewish communities. My dad grew up in Brooklyn, and my mother grew up in Detroit. Her father is a rabbi.
As long as you're doing the genealogy, do you know what their backgrounds were, where their parents and grandparents and stuff had come from?
Yeah, mainly from, it's all from Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia. I actually have roots in Israel going pretty far back. My my great-great-grandfather, my mother's great-grandfather, went from Galicia, Podajec, Poland, Galicia, what is now Poland, to, he traveled as a young man to Sfat, actually. He was a Mikubal, a Kabbalist in Sfat. And then his name was Reb Shalom, and his son, Baruch, moved. The story, at least, is that he kind of rejected the mysticism and moved to Yerushalayim, to Mea Sharim, where my grandfather was born. And then Baruch brought my grandfather and the other siblings to the States. He was the only one of the siblings.
And the grandfather that you're referring to is the one who was your mom's dad.
My dad's dad was who was then a rabbi, him and his brothers. So they're all rabbis. They were, so yeah. And yeah, my father's family from White Russia and Poland, and yeah.
So now, yeah, earlier you were talking about how your dad, once you were living here, I take it, was sort of a traveling rabbi in small synagogues.
Yeah. So my father went to rabbinical school and then didn't finish, ended up for a number of different reasons feeling like he left rabbinical school and decided he wanted to be a professor. So he got his PhD as a Jewish studies professor. But he can play the part of rabbi and he enjoys it. So, I've long memories of, him gigging often for Parnassa. Just, I think both we enjoyed it and it was a way of making some extra money over the Chagim. So when we were in here, like when we were in Amherst, we would go to a number of different communities that didn't support rabbis during the year. So places like Middlebury, Vermont, we went for a couple of years. We went to New Hampshire, Vermont, New Hampshire, some small towns in Massachusetts, and that was always great. There was something, it was, I think, not great to not be with community, with people that I knew, but I think it was always interesting for me, even as a younger kid, to see these small Jewish communities that rallied together for the holidays and in these rural New England towns, and they were always very appreciative. So it was just interesting to be exposed to that. And a lot of these communities were quite old. To be exposed to Jews who were further isolated than we were.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What was your impression of one or another of those communities? Did they seem like sort of tight knit, or do you have are there any images that you can?
Yeah, the image that comes to mind was we went to Middlebury a couple of years, and there's a community that, I think there must have been some chavurah that then got together with the university community for the Chagim. And there's some family that was active that had a farm, had a bunch of land, and they would get together for meals or celebrations over the Chagim at this farm. And that always seemed very sweet. I have images of everyone kind of standing in a big circle towards sunset. I'm not sure what they were doing, singing or sharing, and very beautiful. These communities, I never got the sense that there were many, they were particularly strong or that they were very well educated communities, and they seemed like communities that at least, my impression. Now, certainly was younger, that, that rallied together around the holidays, but I'm not sure, week to week, how strong the particular communities that we went to were. I don't know. Not many young people. I mean, at the Middlebury, there was, students, but the other ones, not too many young people.
Yeah. So, did you leave the area to go away to school? Is that how you ended up leaving Amherst? Or?
Yeah. So after high school, I went to this. Growing up in Young Judea, I went to this program called Young Judea Year Course in Israel with all my friends, and And then I went to Vassar College. So I was often back here in the summers. I feel pretty, this is home. So I've always come back here. I was here a number of summers. I was the director of the Pioneer Valley Jewish Summer Camp for a bunch of summers, Camp Shemesh. That brought me back. I worked on farms in this area. So I keep coming back, but I haven't lived here full time since I graduated from high school. Yeah.
So how did you develop an interest in farming then? I mean, you say you came back and you worked on farming. Where did that come from?
Well, I mean, the roots of the whole passion, I mean, I think I attribute, at least in part, to the places where I grew up, just the physical spaces. I mean, Indiana in particular, I think I just... Yeah, I know. Is this... You know, the landscape, the very landscape kind of was one, you know, both here and there, places that I was surrounded by farms, and I kind of was attracted to the farmscape. In the case of Indiana, probably attracted to some you know, non-sustainable monocultural landscape that I still love, just the kind of acres and acres of, you know, plowed land or landing corn that, you know, I later learned was not a kind of farming that you know, that is great for the land. But so I think that in terms of, you know, just that biophilia, that love of land, and that love of the agrarian landscape, that's, you know, I just kind of assimilated from where I grew up. But in terms of kind of, you know, really what moved me in the direction of wanting to farm myself, I think that, you know, I was studying environmental studies in college, and I started studying, was interested in food system stuff more politically, and you know, sustainable agriculture from, you know, classroom study. And, you know, I think I had a growing feeling studying environmental studies in the classroom that I was just kind of frustrated that I was in the classroom a lot and wasn't getting my hands dirty. So it's a combination of all these different things, of being interested in food and kind of global food issues and sustainable ag issues, politically speaking, and socially, so the social issues implicated, and then some lingering romantic idea of like farming. That just, you know, after my sophomore year, I think, I, you know, decided that I wanted to give it a shot. So that was the first time, you know, and the first farm I worked at was back here at Hampshire College, CSA. Mm-hmm. And I fell in love with it, you know, even after I kind of woke up to, you know, that I got beyond the romantic, you know, ideas and realized that it's really hard work. I just really fell in love with it, and I'd always been someone that, you know, I basically grew up in a creek in Indiana and had a tremendous passion for the outdoors, but had never, sadly, had really positive science experiences in high school, junior high school. So somewhere along the line I decided I was labeled myself, or was labeled as a humanities guy. So that was always tough to kind of break through, and farming was really a way for me to kind of break into, you know, learning science in a hands-on way as an adult. And from that I started getting really excited about you know, just learning about local ecology, and kind of opened my eyes to larger issues. But yeah, so the first thing was in college, and then I just fell in love, and I've kind of, you know, in some way been involved ever since.
What kinds of, you know, this first job you had at the CSA, what kinds of tasks were you involved? Like, what kind of work did you have to do?
That's a farm I was apprenticed, both helping to run the vegetable CSA, which is, it's a CSA that's pretty remarkable. It was one of the first CSAs, maybe the first, if not one of the first CSAs that was connected to a college, where the food was, the bulk of the food was being grown to support the college community, which is a pretty amazing thing, because most of these colleges get their food from these huge, you know, huge corporate food systems that, you know, has gotten a lot of media for the last couple of years for, you know, having less than stellar political decisions. A lot of them are also working in prisons, or whatever. So So, what was the question?
About the Hampshire season.
Oh, yeah.
What kind of work you like? What did you actually have to do?
Yeah, so it was running the farm, vegetables, from learning how to use tractors for the first time, and doing from start to finish, seeding and transplants and weeding and plowing and cultivating and everything. And then there's also the animals there. So we were working with, at that point we had sheep primarily. So also, doing work with the animals and doing general maintenance stuff, some building projects. And it was all new to me. But that was a great first experience because it was a diversified farm and kind of got a little bit of everything. I also got really turned on to herbs there and had the chance to kind of develop a little bit of an herb entrepreneurial program for the farm center, where we were growing lots of medicinal herbs and making some value-added products.
Yeah, which is interesting because it seems like, at least in this part of the country, that's sort of one of the new, like, more viable ways that farmers can make a living.
Right.
Specializing in, like, lavender or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. But it was, I think it was also just a really exciting, it's an exciting first job to be on a CSA too, to have a lot of interactions with your customers and to, to really feel like you're appreciated, to just have that intimacy with the folks that are eating your food. Yeah.
So, and then subsequent summers you worked on other places around here?
Yeah, I worked on a couple of different farms around here. I worked for a short time at the Delta Organic Farm in Hadley. I worked for a short time in this farm in Gill, Mass, where we were growing a lot of echinacea, actually. The summers that I was running director of this summer camp, we had a gardening, not really a farming, but we integrated gardening program into that, and that's when I started getting really excited about using gardening and farming as an educational tool, and specifically as within a Jewish context.
Yeah, which was going to be my next question.
Okay.
Like, how did those things come together for you?
Yeah, I think that, starting in college, I started putting more energy into my Jewish life and taking Judaism seriously, and it was kind of natural. I think that I wanted, in some ways, to make some kind of integration, just to find points of contact between the different passions of my life. Someone that had a strong environmental identity, and then someone that increasingly Judaism was really becoming a centerpiece of my life. It's just, that's how, I don't remember really exactly every part of that process, but I think that's just, it was natural for me as I was beginning to put energy into my Judaism to try to find links, and I think that looking back, I think that was one of the things that really allowed me to start having a much deeper relationship, much more meaningful relationship with Judaism in my own life, was beginning to look at our tradition from through the lens of a grower and through the lens of somebody that was deeply connected to the natural world, I decided I studied both environmental studies. The things that I studied at college, I had an independent major. I studied environmental studies and religion. Mm-hmm. So that, reflects that, even whenever I decided that as a freshman or sophomore, that those were the two major themes of my life. And then in my senior thesis, I had the opportunity to try to make some kind of synergy with those two things. And I spent the year doing a thesis project on the Shemitah, the sabbatical year. And that was extremely exciting for me, and I think that really allowed me to, to really dig into the farming roots, the kind of land-based roots of our tradition, and through that I met a lot of people too. I thought I was like a groundbreaker or something, and then something that helped me get in touch with what had existed at that time in the kind of Jewish environmental community was actually my folks were at the Rural New England Conference, Jews, whatever it's called, and they met somebody, this woman, Michal Smart. I don't know if you know her. She's awesome. And I don't know, they got to talking about me, and she was very involved in Jewish outdoor stuff. And through her I learned about the emerging Kojal Coalition Environment in Jewish Life, that organization, and then just kind of I started learning what there was to learn about in the Northeast who was doing this kind of work. And I learned about this organization, Teva, this Jewish environmental ed organization that then I couldn't believe existed, and knew that needed to be my first job out of college, and that was like a hugely transformative experience to come out of college and be able to really find like-minded folks that were also exploring these connections, and people that had equally strong commitments to Judaism and to the earth. And I did a lot of growing there. I mean, not growing food, but a lot of growing my own I had a chance to really explore this in a deeper way, and was teaching a curriculum to sixth graders, the integrated Torah and ecology. So that was huge.
Yeah, where I'm wondering about, like, are there the particular texts that come to mind? You mentioned the sabbatical year, but what are some of the other, if you have to loop something up for to share with kids, what are some of these things that
there's so many. It's like the whole tradition. I don't, one of my major problems with the Jewish environmental movement, and there's many movements that are part of that, but the kind of broadly speaking, folks that are involved in this work, I think one of my biggest critiques is that, you find like a couple of soundbite Jewish environmental quotes all over the place. If you were to take a look at most of the literature, a lot of it is just repeating the same stuff over and over and over. And from my perspective, pretty shallow ultimately, and kind of idiosyncratic in its and not fair in its approach. By which I mean that there's I don't mean idiosyncratic, I mean anachronistic. You have folks that are kind of a priori looking for certain things in the tradition, trying to argue that Judaism is an environmentalist tradition. Saying, what does Judaism have to say about global warming? What does Judaism have to say about this or that? And it doesn't do much for me. I think that I'm much more interested in trying to see what Judaism has to say on its own terms. I think it has to say a lot. It's incredibly rich in wisdom for those of us who are interested in these issues. But I'm more interested in kind of larger issues of what does Judaism have to say about the relationship between people and the natural world, and when I think you start asking these bigger questions, everything becomes ripe for to be a Jewish environmental text. That sure, there are sexy quotes that you can find here and there, that the catchphrases I'm referring to, themes like Bal Tashchit, not wasting, Tsar Balei Chaim, not creating undue harm to animals. Certainly Shabbos, institution of something like Shabbos or Shemitah or Yovel are institutions that environmentally minded folks love to point to as potentially profoundly sustainable earthwise practices, and that's all true. But I think that a much deeper way is to not like is to, you know, to realize that it's ours is a tradition that's an earth-based tradition that emerges, you know, that just recognize that the Torah is a farming text. A lot of the Mishnah, you know, the Mishnaic, you know, rabbis were farmers, and even texts that don't necessarily explicitly seem to be talking about, you know, you couldn't look to a text and may not explicitly be addressing the environmental, questions that are in the front of your mind. That if you're coming to these texts as a person that cares about these issues, that there's, you know, everything is potentially something that can teach us. So I guess that's what I'm trying to do, is to try to get beyond the sound bites and to just bring myself to the text as someone that, you know, is a grower and is an environmentalist, and not have some kind of a priori kind of assumptions about what the text says. Does that make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
In fact, I guess what you said about the Torah being a farming text, I came across somebody, I think it was this guy, I think that you mentioned him to me, this guy from Vermont.
Yeah, Shmuel.
Yeah. There was something that I was reading, you know, that people were asking about this farm that they were trying to start here.
Right.
And he said, you know, well, our best guide for farming is the Torah, you know, the whole thing. And that was his approach. It was like,
right.
That's your,
right.
Sound like less of a pigeonholing.
Right, that's right. You know, and it's like, yeah, and I mean, I think that's in the spirit of Judaism. I mean, I think one of the things that's really powerful for people like us who, you know, take Judaism seriously is to see that, you know, something that's so compelling is that, you know, in Judaism, you know, there's this strong theme that you know, everything has the potential to be, you know, service of God. That you know, that at a certain point the distinctions between kind of what is holy and what is you know, profane or banal breaks down, and you know, we find lots of literature that speaks to, you know, certainly within the Hasidic literature, but even more, you know, normative stuff in the Gemara that speaks to, you know, toiling and doing just, you know, work in the world as being, you know, potentially holy work, depending on how we approach it. And I think that, you know, if you look at the agricultural laws, you know, for example, they're seen as, you know, an effort instituted as an, you know, a means by which, you know, Jews would, you know, since the time that agricultural laws were, you know, were developed, they were developed because that's what, you know, that's what people were doing. If people were, you know, people were doing something else, then the laws would have, you know, you know, spoken to whatever their livelihood was. But an effort to, you know, to create some kind of, you know, kedusha, to help people live their lives such that, you know, not only when they were praying was that time when they would be relating to God, but that, you know, when they would see their sowing, their plowing, and so on, as also opportunity to be close to God, right? And then, I mean, so this is stuff that fascinates me, and there's a tension in the tradition between, you know, certainly there are more ascetic streams within the tradition of folks that have, you know, a stream that 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 prioritize or elevates certain kinds of service of God, studying Torah primarily, to physical work in the world. But there's also a very strong tradition that says that there's a potential for even higher service, to find ways to have avodah Hashem, to have service of God through physical work in the world, than more so even than prayer. So these are kinds of issues that are really interesting to me. I don't know.
So how did the Adamah this was the first year that program existed, is that right?
There was a pilot program last summer that was short, but this was the first
part of that?
I wasn't, no.
Where did you come in to this program, and how's it been? Talk about that a little bit.
So there's this small pilot program with a couple of folks that was short last summer, kind of happened last minute, and then this summer was the first full-time season. Sometime in the winter, I had been aware of Adamah, but sometime in the winter I had a conversation with Nigel. Do you know Nigel Savage? He's the head of Chazon, this Jewish environmental organization in New York City, bike riding organization. Great. And he's a friend of Adam Berman, the head of Isabella Freeman, and he encouraged me to get involved with, knowing my interest, to get involved with Adamah. It had been kind of on somewhere in my consciousness, but for whatever reason I hadn't pursued it, and just kind of really inspired me to get in touch with Adam. And I called Adam and I kind of floated this idea that I was like, hey, you guys need a rabbinic intern at this program, and he bought it. I think that he realized that in order for the program to be deeper, that it needed to have strong Jewish content, and I basically pitched to him my idea of kind of the kinds of things I'd like to do. So that's how I got involved. Mm-hmm. Again, I think that in the Jewish environmental movement, that the Judaics is often very weak. Science is often weak too, but the Judaics is often very weak, and there's not enough people that are that really have have the ability to get to access the tradition in deep ways that are doing this work. So I think it's one of the many dimensions that one of the many ways in which, in order for the movement to really, in my mind, be to be truly meaningful and do good things for the Jewish community and for the world, that it's going to have to be deeper in that way. It's still very new. So yeah, that was that's how I got involved. Want to speak more about Adamah in general? Or?
Well, sure. I mean, I had a very specific kind of goofy question to ask, which was just that happened the day that we were there. I think just as we were leaving, you were telling the interns that you were going to have a continuation of your discussion about milking on
Chavez.
So I was just curious, where that started and how that whole, just as an example.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a great example. That was like a theme of the summer, one of the many themes of the summer. The issue of milking on Shabbos with our goats. This is a good example of like a halachic issue that it's not necessarily on many people's radar screen and wasn't really on mine. I hadn't really thought about it before. I guess all of a sudden we show up and we have goats, and it occurred to me and a couple other people that that there probably was halakha that involved with that spoke to the issue of milking on Shabbos, and started doing some research, and that's how it started. There was a couple of people in the group for whom halakha was extremely important, and it was a fascinating kind of exploration for me.
Where did the research take you? And then how did your discussion?
Sure. The research, I started, looking in just traditional, I started identifying the issues, and then, just turning to sources, just turning to the codes, and turning to the Gemara to try to find as much material as I could to just to bring to the group. I mean, I think I found one of my roles around these kinds of issues was just to bring the information and facilitate conversations. Even though I had strong feelings about a lot of issues, I tried to not push my own agenda so much, and just help foster a conversation. So yeah, I found a lot of really interesting sources, and helped identify the issues, and one of the challenges with this diverse community is that you have some people for whom halakha is the primary or a primary way in which they're making decisions in their life. And the other people for whom they don't even know what the word halakha is coming into the summer. So for communities like that to negotiate communal decision making is really challenging and very exciting. And I tried to. I hope and I think that these kinds of conversations and discussions were exciting and of interest to people, regardless of their specific relationship with halakha. I tried to make the point to people that as people that are seeing themselves as Jewish farmers, at least for the time being, that just to be part of that. That continuum of Jewish farmers. I think that there's something to be said for just learning about the ways in which Jews of the past have negotiated with these issues, and it gives us the ability to begin to kind of to see the kinds of things that they were thinking about, and to see how they negotiated kind of their just real issues of making a livelihood, and just basic farming issues in their Jewish identity, and communal issues. So there was great debate, heated debate, and we never really got to a consensus, which was very difficult for me a lot of the time. But in the end, I think we all realized that a lot of these issues, what was most powerful was just to be in the conversation. And truly remarkable to have this diverse group that was really respectful and compassionate for one another, and we learned everything. And then, maybe if we had a couple more conversations, we could get to some place. But people kind of at this point were going to make their own informed decisions themselves. And we had basic guidelines.
I'm guessing that whatever you talked about or decided, the goats got milked.
Oh, well, that's a non-issue because they have to be milked. Without getting into...
The question was whether you would...
The question is right. The codes are clear. Because there's the principle of tzar b'alei chayim, of not creating undue harm for animals. Doches, it trumps the isur of the malacha of Shabbos. It trumps the prohibition of doing milking, because milking is forbidden on Shabbos. But because there's this principle of tzar b'alei chayim, you have to milk because it's dangerous for the animal. There's no option but to milk. So the question is not whether milk, it's how you milk, what to do with the milk, who milks. That was a big question for our community, because traditionally you'd have the most common way, traditionally going all the way back to the Goanim, is that you would have a non-Jew milk, a Shabbos koi. That wasn't an option for our community for a number of different reasons. So then traditionally what people would do is they would get rid of the milk. They would they would ruin the milk as they were milking, right? Because you couldn't benefit from the work that you do. So you would put soap in the bucket, or you'd put dirt as you were milking, or you'd milk it straight onto the milking stand. But that was a big issue for us because, for a lot of folks, it's so wrong to waste perfectly good food. Yeah. So then the question of, can we milk and then give it to non-Jews? A lot of stuff. A lot of interesting things. I mean, one of the big conversations we also had was whether we could get a pig. The Jewish community get a pig because we have all this huge amount of food waste. I forget, we might have talked about this.
I talked about that a little bit with
Shimu.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like these kinds of, and it was very exciting for me personally. I think I emerged from the summer in a much deeper relationship with halakha, because this is like my passion. So it's like to turn to the codes and to find Jews who struggle with these very issues, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Gemara. It was fascinating for me. I mean, it's so exciting for me, to have this issue around the pig, and then to turn and find in the sources like, medieval sources that are, basically dealing with almost identical question. And then to build on that and to see what the issues are for our community. Yeah, it's very exciting.
I think especially because in a situation like that, the issues aren't abstract.
That's right.
At all. They're
That's
they're
right.
real. So it just puts more onus on you to investigate and converse.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and I think that for people for whom Judaism is new, are people who still have really the beginning stages of developing a relationship or a spiritual practice with Judaism, as a lot of the fellows were. I think there was something, because of what you're pointing out, just something, the very practical, hands-on nature of what they're doing was really, I think, an amazing way in. I think one of my convictions that, going into the summer was that this kind of work was a really amazing way for young people to, develop a deep relationship with Judaism. One of my goals, I was thinking about my goals for the summer was that, I don't think I would feel successful if at the end of the summer, people just knew a couple of, these, they could repeat to you a couple of reasons why Judaism is environmental religion, and or know a couple of nice Jewish environmental Torahs, but that's a door in for as it was really for me, to then develop just a deeper relationship with Judaism in general. And I think that was the case. I think that is the case for folks.
A couple of things I want to ask. One has to do with sort picking up on like the connection to place, and how, I guess for me, I always wonder from a Jewish perspective about the connection to place. Is there something particular about Eretz Yisrael that makes it a more important or appropriate place than other places? I guess that's sort of one of the things I'm wondering about it. Or if you're not living there and you're living here or wherever else, how do you forge a sense of place as a Jew?
Oy. Yeah, no, that's a huge question that I do think about. I think that a lot of us are forced to think about. Certainly, when you talk about the holiness of place and relationship to place, as a Jew, there's haaretz, right? And I think that, historically speaking, that, we've always, longed for, we emerge from a certain place, we long for a certain place, we pray 3 times a day for the, the redemption and the return to a certain place. So there's, at a certain level, there's no getting around the fact that there's a specific place on earth that that has always been the place for Jews. So for those of us who live outside of Israel, or don't feel like for one reason or another don't find ourselves in Israel or want to live in Israel, and are interested in find ourselves connected deeply to other places, and are looking to tradition to speak to our to help us, to guide us in thinking about our relationship to other places, to our land in Western Massachusetts. I think that's a huge question that I continue to struggle with. I think there's different ways of approaching that. I don't know what I have to say about it right now.
Yeah, I don't mean to...
No. It's like such an important... It's like, this is like such a huge issue, I think, for me, and a really hard one. Yeah, I'm going to think about it more, and maybe get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing... maybe I should flip my tape.
Yeah, so the question about the future. I mean, this summer was huge for me because it was the ability to, I went into rabbinical school largely on this hunch that it was going to be a way that I could integrate my passions in the most meaningful way, namely Judaism, Torah, working with youth, activism stuff, farming, environmental, so on. And I had bits and pieces, experiences of integrating one or two of those things. And this summer was really the first opportunity that I had in a sustained way to really experience that integration. And thank God it did feel good. It did feel very fulfilling and felt like my work that I was really called to do. So so that's very affirming, and I think that I can imagine myself being very happy doing very similar work to what I was doing this summer as a rabbi, working with teens or with young people in an agrarian context, doing in a communal context, doing learning Torah and teaching farming. I mean, at some point I realized I wasn't cut out to be a real farmer, but I think I always need to be farming. So. I really love the idea of being in an environment where I can be teaching Torah in the fields and teaching farming, and then really striving to create some kind of smooth and meaningful and authentic synergy between the learning that we do in the field and the learning that we do in the Beit Midrash. And it felt like that was working, to have both parts inform the other, right? To have issues that come up in the field, then direct what we're going to be learning in the classroom, and vice versa, for what we're learning in the classroom help inform how we farm. That worked, and it was great because we didn't know what would come up. We didn't know what would come up. Maybe we're having issue with pests, and then we realize, issues of how we respond to those pests, and we can turn to sources to help us think about what's the proper way to do that. Or we have an abundance of food, and we want to give food away, and our sources have so much to teach us about, ways of thinking of how to give our food away. And the issues that we spoke of with the goats and so much stuff. So yeah, I mean, one of the ideas that I've had for quite some time is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Mountain School in Vermont.
Heard of it.
It's a really cool school. It's a secular school that is for high schoolers. I think people go for a semester of their junior year. I had a couple of friends in high school who went. It's a school that, is a rigorous academic school that's done in a farming context. Just high schoolers take a semester from their regular schools and go there and live on this farm and study everything that they study at school, but it's like having to do with farming. So I had this idea that maybe we could do something like that, Jewish. I think that I'm still like that idea. But I also really liked working with this age of working with kind of college students and post-college, and there's so many. You go to the NOFA conference, and it's like so many of the interns and so many of the farmers happen to be Jewish. And we had tons of more applicants than we could fill at Adamah. So I feel like there's a need and there's a desire. So I hope to find some way, whether at Friedman or elsewhere, to serve as a rabbi that is working on all these issues with young people. Yeah.
So you're not gonna be